The rain hadn't even started when my father's voice split the air like thunder. "Get out. Go live in the streets. You're a useless failure." It was strange how final those words sounded, like he had rehearsed them, like they were a verdict he'd been waiting to deliver for years. My mother, Margaret, stood behind him, arms folded, face drained of anything human. I remember how calm she looked, as if throwing away their son was just another errand on her list. There was no flicker of regret, no hesitation, just the kind of silence that follows after you've made up your mind to stop loving someone. The faint tremor in her lip betrayed her, though. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or fear. I held her gaze for a second too long, and she looked away. My father, Richard, saw it. His jaw tightened, his pride hardening into the weapon it had always been. I didn't shout back. I didn't beg. I just smiled. A slow, hollow smile that made him flinch for a second before he straightened his spine again. I think he mistook my silence for shame. He had no idea what silence really meant. I turned away. My shoes crunched on the gravel as I stepped into the night. The wind bit into my face, cold and sharp, like the world was reminding me I was truly on my own now. The door slammed behind me, echoing down the empty driveway. I didn't have a suitcase. No plan. No warning. Just the clothes I wore and the truth I'd been hiding for 3 years. $20 million. That's what my parents had just thrown out of their house. It wasn't an inheritance or stolen wealth or some miracle lottery. It was mine, built piece by piece, night after night, while they were busy reminding me I was worthless. I didn't care about the money that night. Not yet. The betrayal was heavier than any dollar amount. It settled in my chest like a slow poison, creeping through every vein until it replaced everything soft left inside me. I walked until my legs ached, until the houses turned into flickering streetlights and wet concrete. The city was quieter than usual. I found an alley where the rain couldn't reach me and sat there, watching my breath fog in the cold air. My father's voice still echoed in my head. "You'll never survive without us." He used to say it like a prayer, a mantra of control. Every time I made a mistake, every time I hesitated, he'd remind me that I was nothing more than a burden he tolerated out of duty. My mother never disagreed. She just watched from a distance, detached and compliant. She had perfected the art of silent cruelty. They used to call it honesty. "Ethan," my father would say, "we're just being honest with you. The world doesn't owe you anything." I used to believe him. I used to think they were shaping me, toughening me up for a world that wouldn't care about my feelings. But now, sitting there with the weight of nothing in my pockets, I realized they weren't preparing me for life. They were teaching me how to live unloved. That night, something inside me fractured, but not in the way they hoped. It wasn't weakness that filled the cracks. It was clarity. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. A single text from my mother. "Don't come back here." No apology. No explanation. Just a command that felt rehearsed, like she had been waiting to say it. I should have ignored it, but something about the tone itched at the back of my mind. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Cold, calculated fear. I started to wonder what she was afraid of. Not me. Not Richard. Something else. I began to think about everything they'd hidden over the years. The arguments whispered behind closed doors. The late-night phone calls. The weekends my father was on business trips that left her pale and quiet when he returned. There were cracks in their perfect facade. Cracks I'd ignored for too long. I decided to look closer. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. I wanted to understand. So I went back to the house at night, parking across the street, engine off, lights dimmed. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet, upper class, a little too proud of its own stillness. Their house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, large and dark, except for a faint glow from the kitchen window. I watched through the blinds. My father's car wasn't in the driveway. My mother sat at the table motionless, staring at her phone. Every few seconds, she checked the window like she was expecting someone. I stayed there for hours, until my eyes blurred from the strain. A week later I saw it. A man leaving the house at midnight. His posture was familiar, his jacket too, but it wasn't my father. Someone else. He walked down the steps quietly, confident, like he belonged there. My mother followed him to the porch. She reached out, touched his arm, and for a moment her hand lingered, too long to be innocent. When the car disappeared into the dark, she stood there, still smiling. The same hollow smile I'd worn the night they threw me out. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. The truth was already crawling out on its own. Something was unraveling, and I wasn't going to stop it. I'd waited my whole life for their version of honesty. Now it was my turn to let reality do the talking. Over the next few days, I started piecing things together. I still had access to their shared phone account, one of the few things they'd forgotten to lock down when they disowned me. A number appeared over and over again in the call logs. Always late at night. Always when my father was out of town. I traced it. The name that came back hit me like déjà vu. Derek Lane, my father's former business partner. The man who betrayed him years ago in a failed investment. The same man he swore he'd destroy if they ever crossed paths again. Apparently, ruin wasn't mutual. I stared at that name until the letters blurred. My mother, Derek Lane, the late-night calls, the secrecy. Everything began to click into place. They didn't throw me out because I was useless. They threw me out because I was a threat to their secret. Because if Richard ever found out about Derek, it wouldn't be me living on the streets. It would be her. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights bleeding through the window behind me. My reflection looked calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes after you realize you've stopped being afraid. They thought they could bury me in silence. They never realized I'd learned to make silence my weapon, and I was done being their son. Seattle had always been a city of noise. Buses sighing at every stop, distant sirens curling through fog, rain whispering against glass. But that week, the world around me felt muted. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the weight of knowing something I couldn't unlearn. Derek Lane. The name looped through my head like static. I remembered him from years ago. He used to come to our house when I was a teenager, always with the same sharp suit and perfect smile. He'd talk business with my father, laugh too loud at his own jokes, and flirt too easily with my mother when he thought no one was watching. My father trusted him once. Until a deal went wrong. A real estate project that collapsed under mismanagement and greed. Richard Cole lost millions, and his reputation took a hit that never really healed. He blamed Derek, swore he'd ruin him. It became one of his favorite bedtime stories. Never trust a snake in a suit, Ethan. Men like Derek are poison. Poison. The irony burned now. I stared at my laptop screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I dug deeper into Derek's life. He was still in the game, running a smaller firm now, one that specialized in rebuilding failed ventures.
The euphemism made me laugh under my breath. He'd rebuilt himself right into my mother's life. I started collecting data, call logs, hotel receipts, credit card charges. My parents had been careless, or maybe they never thought I'd look. The phone bill was still under my name, a leftover convenience from when I used to handle their online accounts. I went through the records line by line. The pattern was obvious. Always the same time. Always the same number. Always when Richard was away. But I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. The truth needed to be complete. Truth is fragile when it's rushed. It breaks before it can cut deep enough. So I waited. I watched. I rented a room in a small hotel downtown, right across from Derek's office building. It wasn't luxury, but it had a good view and a steady supply of coffee. I told the front desk I was a freelance consultant working on a local project. They didn't ask questions. No one ever does when you sound like you belong. From my window, I could see Derek's routine unfold every day like clockwork. He arrived at 8:15 a.m., coffee in hand, talking on his phone. Lunch at 12:30, usually alone. Then back until 6 o'clock. Sometimes he stayed late, and that's when things got interesting. I saw her once. Margaret, my mother. She walked into his office building on a Friday evening. Coat collar turned up, sunglasses despite the rain. She didn't see me. I was too far in behind my window. I felt my throat tighten as I watched her step into the elevator with him. Her hand brushed his arm. Familiar, practiced. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't ashamed. She looked alive. For a moment, I felt something I couldn't name. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Detachment. I took photos, blurry, distant, but enough. Proof doesn't always need clarity. Sometimes implication does the job better. The next few days, I gathered more credit card slips, trace hotel bookings, timestamp phone calls. It all formed a picture that even Richard couldn't deny. But I wasn't collecting it for revenge. Not entirely. I wanted to understand the moment they decided to betray not only him, but me too. Because their choice to throw me out wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. They needed me gone, out of the way, far enough that I couldn't see what was rotting beneath their polished lives. I realized something then. My parents were never victims of their mistakes. They were architects of them. By the end of the week, I had a file. A simple black folder filled with paper, printed screenshots, photos, records. I could destroy their lives with it, or maybe just reveal the truth and let it destroy itself. But before that, I needed one thing, confirmation from him. Derek Lane. So I followed him. Not every day, just enough to learn his rhythm. He lived alone in a high-rise overlooking the bay, ate at the same cafe every Sunday, and of course, made late-night trips to a certain suburban street twice a week. My parents' house. I remember one night vividly. I sat in my car across the street as he arrived. He parked with the headlights off, confident in his secrecy. The porch light flicked on a minute later. Margaret stepped out, wrapped in her robe. The look on her face said everything. Affection mixed with fear, the thrill of danger masked as devotion. She kissed him, slow, familiar, as if they had all the time in the world. When he left, she stayed on the porch, staring into the dark. Her expression changed then. The confidence cracked. She looked around nervously, almost trembling. For a moment, I thought she saw me, but she turned away and went back inside. That was when I knew she wasn't just hiding something from my father. She was running from something too. Maybe Derek wasn't the love story she'd hoped for. Maybe he was leverage. The next morning, I printed everything and organized it carefully. I had the truth now, but truth is like a loaded gun. You don't pull the trigger unless you're ready for the echo. So I made a choice. I wouldn't confront her. I'd confront him. I called my father that night. It had been almost a month since he threw me out. The call rang longer than I expected before he picked up. His voice was flat, guarded. "What do you want, Ethan?" "Dad," I said quietly, "we need to talk." "About what?" I paused. "About Derek." There was a silence on the line, so heavy it almost hummed. Then, without a word, he hung up. That was fine. I didn't need his permission to detonate the truth. I just needed his attention. 2 nights later, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Richard Cole stood there, soaked in rain, shoulders rigid, eyes hollow. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Where did you hear that name?" he demanded. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. He hesitated, then entered. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken resentment. I handed him the folder without a word. He opened it slowly, flipping to the pages. I watched his eyes scan the photos, the messages, the receipts. I saw his expression shift, from disbelief to confusion, then to something raw and unfamiliar. When he reached the final page, a photo of her hand on Derek's back. His breath hitched. He began, but the words broke before they formed. I said nothing. He sat down, the folder trembling in his hands. The rain outside hit the windows harder now, echoing the rhythm of his breathing. "Why are you showing me this?" he whispered finally. "Because," I said, my voice calm and deliberate, "you threw me out for being worthless. I thought you should see who's really wasting your life." He looked at me then, really looked. For the first time, the man who had always been stone-faced and invincible seemed human, defeated. Thunder cracked outside, shaking the glass. He didn't say another word. He just sat there, silent, staring at the truth until it swallowed him. And as I watched him crumble, I didn't feel victory, just silence. The same silence he once mistook for weakness. Only now it belonged to me. When I was a kid, I used to think thunder came after lightning because the sky couldn't handle its own secrets. That night, as Richard sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the folder in his shaking hands, I realized the same rule applied to people. The truth had struck, and now came the thunder. Slow, echoing, and impossible to ignore. He didn't speak for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on my wall, and the rain clawing at the windows. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bloodshot, the fury in him tempered by disbelief. "Are you sure?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Every page in that folder was an answer written in someone else's handwriting. He stood up, paced the room, muttering under his breath, fragments of questions that didn't deserve answers. When? How? Why her? His fists clenched and unclenched. At one point, he slammed the folder onto the table and shouted, "It's not true!" But his voice cracked halfway through, and the denial sounded more like a plea. I watched him quietly, detached. The man who had told me I'd never survive without him now looked like he couldn't survive the truth. He turned to me suddenly, his face hard again. "You planned this. You're trying to hurt us." I almost laughed. "No, Dad, I didn't plan your lies." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked around my apartment. The minimalist furniture, the tidy desk, the laptop glowing softly in the corner, as if searching for proof that I was still the failure he'd invented. There was none. "You really made it," he said finally, voice flat. "You've been successful. $20 million worth of useless." I replied. He winced, but I didn't feel satisfaction, just a hollow ache. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. I stood by the window, watching him disappear into the rain, his outline dissolving like ink in water. I thought that would be the end of it, that he'd go home, confront her, and let their world collapse the way it deserved to. But collapse isn't a single event. It's a slow unraveling, one thread at a time. He didn't call the next day, or the day after, but I didn't need him to. News travels fast when people like Richard Cole begin to bleed. I heard it first from an old colleague who didn't know I was listening. Cole Investments is in trouble. Clients are pulling out. Something about a scandal. By the end of the week, the story had cracked open. Leaked documents, mismanaged funds, whispers of internal betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had built his empire on the illusion of control. Now it was collapsing under the same arrogance that built it. I drove by the house once. The gate was open, the lawn unkept, a for sale sign half buried in mud. My father's car wasn't there. My mother's, however, was. I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, watching the silhouette in the upstairs window. Margaret. She moved like a ghost, pacing, phone pressed her ear. I imagined the conversation, frantic, defensive, desperate. And then I saw him, Derek Lane, walking up the driveway like he owned it. I felt my pulse spike. He didn't even hesitate, just walked up, knocked once, and let himself in when the door opened. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, that familiar sneer. Never trust a snake in a suit. Apparently, my mother never learned that lesson. I waited, maybe 15 minutes. Then the front door burst open. Richard came out this time, rain pouring down, shirt half buttoned, folder in hand. His voice tore through the night. "Get out of my house." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Derek stepped outside, calm, composed. "Richard, listen." "Get out." For a second, I thought he'd hit him. But my father just stood there, chest heaving, face red. My mother appeared behind him, clutching the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Richard, please." "Don't you dare." His voice broke. "Don't you dare say a word." Derek turned and walked away, jacket over his arm, not even glancing back. My mother reached for Richard's arm, but he yanked it away. She stumbled, catching herself on the frame. The door slammed. The house went dark. I sat there, frozen, the rain masking the heat rising behind my eyes. I wanted him to see the truth, and now he had. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching a building you grew up in catch fire, beautiful in its destruction, but still painful to look at. 3 weeks passed before I heard from him again. He called one evening, voice small, tired, almost unrecognizable. "Ethan," he said, "the house is quiet now." "Is it?" "She's gone," he said after a pause. "Margaret left, took what she could." His voice trembled. "The business is falling apart. Clients, they know. I can't fix it." He went silent for a while, and I could hear his breathing through the phone. Slow, deliberate, as if each word cost him something. "I need your help," he said finally. "Come home, please." I let the silence stretch between us. The same kind of silence he used to punish me with. "Come home," he repeated. "We can fix this. Together." I closed my eyes. The irony stung. The man who once told me to live in the streets was now asking for my rescue. "I don't live in the streets anymore, Dad," I said softly. He exhaled, confused. "Ethan, I didn't mean..." "I never did." He didn't understand. Not until a few minutes later, when I sent him a bank transfer. Just $1. The memo line read, "For the man who taught me how to lose everything." He called again. I didn't answer. I let him sit in that silence. The same silence he once mistook for shame. Because now it wasn't shame. It was power. Days later, I went back to the house one last time. It didn't look like a home anymore. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown, the mailbox overflowing with unopened letters. The gate hung open like an apology. I stood by the curb, hands in my pockets, listening to the wind. Somewhere inside, a door creaked. Maybe it was just a draft. Or maybe the ghosts of old voices were still trying to argue. I thought I'd feel triumph, that sweet, sharp taste of revenge. But I didn't. I just felt distance, like looking at an old scar and barely remembering how much it hurt when it was fresh. They'd thrown me out to protect their lie. I built a life out of their absence. The irony wasn't that they lost everything. It was that I didn't need to destroy them to win. All I had to do was let the truth exist. And in the end, the truth was louder than any thunder. The rain had finally stopped the morning I drove back to Seattle. For the first time in months, the sky wasn't a wall of gray. It was open, streaked with soft gold light breaking through the clouds. It felt almost symbolic, like the city itself had decided to breathe again. I parked my car outside the coffee shop where it all began. The same one where I used to sit years ago, drinking cheap coffee, scrolling through job listings, wondering how I'd ever build a life without my family's approval. Back then, I believed the cold name defined me. Now, it was just a shadow in my past. I hadn't heard from my father in weeks. After that last call, he'd gone silent. But I'd heard whispers his company was sold, assets liquidated, and he'd moved into a small condo near Lake Union. My mother, however, was still in town. Alone, she reached out through a short, formal email. "Ethan, I would like to see you. Just once. Please." No apologies. No explanations. Just that. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit in the same silence they'd given me. But another part, the part that still remembered her humming while cooking breakfast or her soft hands brushing dust off my shoulders when I fell, needed closure. So I agreed. The cafe was half empty when she arrived. She looked older, smaller somehow. The kind of person who had spent years fighting battles no one else could see. She spotted me immediately but hesitated before approaching, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to anymore. "Ethan," she whispered. "Mom." Her eyes glistened as she sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the espresso machine and the quiet murmur of strangers filled the gap between us. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. She smiled faintly, then looked down, fidgeting with her cup. "I know you hate me. I would too." "I don't hate you," I said, though part of me wanted to. "I just don't understand how you could let it happen." Her lip trembled. "Your father, he was always proud, Ethan. He thought love was something that had to be earned. He made me believe that too. And when you left, She stopped, took a breath. "I told myself you'd come back, that he'd change when he saw you were gone. But he didn't. He just got worse." I watched her quietly. "You could have called. You could have stopped him." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I know. And I didn't. I was a coward." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she wasn't the elegant woman who once ruled every dinner table with perfection. She was just a broken mother, sitting in a coffee shop, facing the consequences of silence. "I lost both of you," she whispered. "Your father and I. We destroyed everything trying to protect a life that wasn't real. And you built something without us. You made it." For a moment, the air felt heavy, like the past was sitting between us, taking up all the space in the room. "I didn't make it to prove you wrong," I said softly. "I made it because I had to survive." She nodded slowly, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded photograph. It was old, creased and faded. Me, at 12 years old, holding a baseball bat, my father's arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling like we believed life would always stay that simple. "I kept this," she said, "through everything." I stared at it. My younger self looked so certain, so eager to please. It was strange to look at that boy and realize he'd spent most of his life chasing the approval of people who never intended to give it. "Do you still talk to him?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, he won't answer my calls." Her voice fell to a whisper. "I think he's ashamed." I didn't respond. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. But shame doesn't undo damage. It only acknowledges it too late. We talked for nearly 2 hours, about everything and nothing, about her regret, my work, the years we lost. There were no grand apologies, no cinematic forgiveness, just an understanding that we couldn't change what had already burned. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated again. "Ethan," she said, "you've done so much, but I hope you still let yourself rest. Sometimes survival becomes its own prison." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she walked away, I realized that maybe closure doesn't come with forgiveness. It comes with acceptance. That evening, I drove to the edge of the city, to a cliff overlooking Puget Sound. The water was calm, rippling under the amber glow of sunset. The same skyline that once felt suffocating now looked peaceful. I thought about my father, alone in some half-empty apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of his own pride. I thought about my mother, trying to pick up the shards of a life built on secrets. And then I thought about myself, not the boy they threw out, but the man who learned to build without them. I reached into my jacket and pulled out another photo, my wedding invitation, never mailed to them. The edges were worn, a little bent. I stared at it for a long time, then let the wind take it. It fluttered once, then disappeared into the sound. For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness, just relief. Months later, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. "Ethan, you were right. I built a life on control, and it crumbled because I never learned how to love freely. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I am proud of you, not for your money, but for surviving what I made you endure. Richard." I folded the letter, placed it in my desk drawer, and never replied. Some words are meant to be read, not answered. Years have passed since then. I have a small family now, my wife, my daughter, and peace. We don't speak much about the Coles. My daughter once asked why I didn't visit my parents. I told her, because sometimes love means knowing when to walk away. And I meant it. When people ask about my past, I don't tell them the full story. I just say I learned 2 things, that blood doesn't always mean family, and silence can be both a weapon and a refuge. The Cole legacy ended the day they chose a vacation over my wedding. My legacy began the day I stopped waiting for their approval. And in the end, I found what they never did. Peace not from being loved, but from finally loving myself.